Hi everyone, Phil Snyder with GunClassUtah.com. Hey, today I've got a really good lesson on road rage and some weapons laws. I just saw a story that happened down in Washington County, Utah, in the St. George area. There was a man that was arrested for pointing a handgun at another motorist during a road rage incident, and he was subsequently arrested. So this video is going to be if you are a gun owner, if you have a concealed firearm permit, whether you have one or not, if you own a handgun and you want to know what your rights are. There's also some new road rage laws that have passed and the consequences of those. And also, there are new reporting requirements for uses of force in Utah, which are going into effect this year on May the 7th. So, if you want a good legal update and some tips on how to not be this poor guy that got arrested, he's in pretty hot water. Uh, this video is going to be really useful for you. Here's the article right here. It says a man was arrested after allegedly pulling out a handgun in a road rage incident. Nathan Chescilly, age 28, was arrested on suspicion of threat or use of a dangerous weapon in a fight, a third-degree felony, the affidavit states. On Tuesday, officers with the Washington City Police Department were dispatched to a weapon brandishing on 300 East Telegraph Street. When officers arrived at the scene, they met with the victim who claimed to have accidentally committed a traffic violation. The victim said another driver brandished a handgun at him. The suspect, identified as Chescilly, allegedly pointed a green laser at the victim. The laser was mounted to a black Glock-style handgun, the affidavit states. The victim took Chescilly's license plate and got a description of him. Officers made contact with Chescilly, who admitted his involvement. Chescilly said the victim made an improper lane change, swerved, and cut him off. He thought the victim might be trying to hit him, so he pointed his handgun and turned on the mounted laser, the affidavit states. The two vehicles pulled over. Chescilly reportedly walked to the passenger side of the victim's car and yelled at him before he left the area. Officers arrested Chescilly and took him into custody without incident. The handgun was recovered from the vehicle. Now let's take a look at what the suspect was arrested and booked into jail and charged with. I just pulled this law up here. 76-10-506, threatening with or using a dangerous weapon in a fight or a quarrel. If you go down here to paragraph 2, the elements of this crime. In other words, so in order for a prosecutor to successfully convict this man of what his behavior, the elements are if he, in this case, points this gun at somebody or displays it or draws it, if he does that in an angry and threatening manner, and it says it has to be in the presence of two or more individuals, and it does not amount to aggravated assault, which is 76-5103, which is a more serious crime, then he would be guilty of a Class A misdemeanor. Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, I thought they said it was a third-degree felony. Well, ordinarily, it would be a Class A misdemeanor, but under Utah's new road rage laws that were passed last year, under the new law, if a crime is committed in a road rage incident, it makes misdemeanors felonies under this law. There's also some other penalties that we'll talk about here in a minute. Okay, so if you look at paragraph 3 here, this is a defense to this charge. And basically what this says is that you have an affirmative defense to this charge if you reasonably believe, in this case, that drawing and pointing this laser at somebody was necessary in defense of a person. And that is under this 76-2402. So in other words, if the police bought off the story that this suspect pointed this gun at this person in lawful self-defense, he would have a legitimate defense and he probably would not have been arrested for this charge. However, it's obvious to me that the police did not buy into his story that he felt like this guy was trying to hurt him with his car. And they probably just thought that this other driver just, inadvertently cut him off because maybe he was a bad driver or something like that. But they just didn't buy that story that he needed to point that gun because his life was in some sort of danger. Important note here, it doesn't require the use of a gun in order to get a charge like this. It could be any dangerous weapon. And if you look at 1A, a dangerous weapon is defined. It could be anything. It could be, threatening somebody with a crowbar or a knife or a baseball bat or anything that can cause a serious injury or death, something like that. There's another charge, a more serious charge that the officers could have arrested this guy on. It's called aggravated assault right here. And it says under 2A, a person commits aggravated assault if they either make an attempt with unlawful force to do bodily injury, or they make a threat accompanied by a show of immediate force to do bodily injury, or if the actor commits an act with unlawful force or violence that either causes bodily injury or creates a substantial risk. So the officers probably could have used this one right here, and they could say under paragraph 3 that pointing a gun at somebody with a laser on them created a risk of bodily injury. In other words, if that gun could have gone off and it could have injured them or killed them, this is something that they probably could have arrested this guy on, which would make it more serious, because this charge right here of aggravated assault is a second-degree felony. So I think the officers probably cut this guy a break. Now let's talk about Utah new road rage law that went into effect last year, July 1st, 2024, that made it even worse for this guy that got arrested. And so everybody should really listen up on this and pay attention. You can find this under Utah Title 76-3-203.17. The legislature has defined the new road rage law as when an occupant of a vehicle commits a criminal offense in response to an incident that occurs or escalates on a roadway and they have intent to endanger or intimidate somebody. Okay? The enhancement makes misdemeanors felonies, as we described earlier. In this guy's case right here, if he's found guilty, this means he will serve, because it's a third-degree felony, he will serve a minimum of a 1-year term in prison. It could be up to 5 years for a third-degree felony. And he will pay no less than a $1,000 fine, and he could be sentenced up to $5,000, and it's going to depend on his history and criminal record if he has any. In addition to this, he's probably going to have to pay a minimum of a $10,000 retainer to get a good criminal attorney to represent him. A good criminal attorney is probably going to cost you $500 an hour or more. So think about that. 20 hours is going to use all of that $10,000 retainer. And if this gets settled at a pretrial, I would say a minimum of $10,000 is he's going to have to pay. If they're not able to settle it and it goes to a jury trial, I wouldn't be surprised if this could go up to $50,000 for this guy's charge to defend himself. Here's another consequence this guy arrested is going to face. Because he has a pending felony charge, he is not allowed to own or possess a handgun both under Utah and federal law. So even though he hasn't been convicted because it's a pending felony, if he's got a concealed firearm permit, he's going to get it revoked or suspended. And even if he's found acquitted of his charge, that will remain, and for a certain amount of time. Here's the other thing. Utah law passed about 3 years ago gives you the right, If you are charged with a Class A misdemeanor or a felony and you claim that your actions were in self-defense, you have the right to have a justification hearing in front of a judge. And under that law, the prosecutor's burden to prove with clear and convincing evidence to the judge that you were not acting under lawful self-defense. If the judge finds that you were justified, then those charges against you by the prosecutor are dismissed with prejudice, which means that they cannot refile them later. That was a review of your use of force, and a judge decided that your use of force was lawful. If the judge finds that you were not justified, which they're probably going to find this guy not justified, now a prosecutor has a green light to prosecute you in a criminal proceeding with a jury or a bench trial. And if you want to read up on that self-defense justification hearing, that is under Utah Title 76-2-309. I'm not going to read it just to keep this video short. Here's another law that was passed this year that's going to affect everybody under self-defense. House Bill 561, Use of Force Reporting Requirements. This bill was passed and it goes into effect May 7, 2025. And under this circumstance, this is another thing that's adversely affected this suspect that was arrested. Under this new law that was passed, that goes into effect May 7th. So actually, I suppose that this will not affect him because he was arrested before May 7th. But after May 7th, if you're arrested for something like this and you do not report your use of force, you do not have the right to have a justification hearing. Very important. Because we know, according to the article, this guy, suspect that was arrested, did not go home and call the police and report his use of force. So under this new law, this is another requirement that we have if we are acting in self-defense. Also, under all use of force laws in Utah, there are 4 laws: Utah 76-2-402, 405, 406, and 407. Effective May 7th, 2025, under the law, it says you shall report your use of force when immediately, as soon as you are not in danger. So what that means is, if you're involved in a self-defense incident, you shall immediately report your use of force to law enforcement as soon as you are no longer in imminent danger. Now, this is a slippery slope for them to make law for you to require to report yourself in a use of force incident. So, what are you required to actually report? Does this mean that you have to write an essay to the officer as to what happened? Does this mean that you have to go in for an interview and interrogation with a recorded interview? And does this mean that you have to go into the police department and provide an interview? No, it's not what it means at all. So I'm not a criminal attorney, so I'm not going to give you legal advice. But the law, if you read it, it's very short. It just says that you shall report your use of force to law enforcement as soon as you are not in imminent danger. If you're involved in a use of force incident, you want to be the first one to call 911. It makes you look like you are the victim, you are the complainant. You don't have anything to hide. You do want to be the first one to call. When you call, those dispatch lines are recorded. When you're talking with officers, there's a really good chance they're going to have a body camera recording you and everything you say and all your body mannerisms. And they're going to use those dispatch tapes. Those body cameras are going to be, the recordings and things like that are going to be placed into evidence and something that a prosecutor is going to look at later on to decide whether they're going to charge you if there is enough evidence to do so. You have Fifth Amendment right protections to not incriminate yourself. And in situations like that, you can easily do that. Consult with a criminal attorney if you're curious what you would need to say in the event of your involvement in a self-defense incident that would meet these requirements. I would say, based on the plain language of the statute, if you just recalled the police and you said, hey, I am here to report my use of force involved in this self-defense incident, and you identified yourself, that would probably be all that you would need to say. Now, obviously, a police officer is going to ask you a lot more questions than that, and it's going to be up to you to decide whether or not you want to provide any further details. Uh, if I was involved in something like this, whether I had something to hide or not, I would probably just in a very nice and respectful manner to the officers just state that you've been through a lot and I'd like to talk to my attorney before answering any further questions. Some additional consequences of road rage under this new law: they shall impound your vehicle if you're arrested. Shall, just like in a DUI, they impound vehicles. And you can also have your driver's license suspended or revoked under road rage law. Just to finalize, tips on road rage. To avoid this mistake, don't take it personal. If somebody cuts you off in traffic, I get the anger with this suspect. I get that. Utah's got the worst drivers in the nation, in my opinion, and people are just not paying attention when they drive. They're on their phone, they're putting their makeup on, they're eating, they just got their mind on something else. What I've seen in law enforcement, I'm a retired officer now, but I've been in law enforcement for 30 years and I've been on a number of road rage cases. And once that adrenaline gets going, your heart gets racing, you don't make the best decisions. So if somebody does something to upset you the way they drive, I get that. But it's just a minor traffic violation like that. Have you ever been out to a pond and seen ducks in the water and they come up out of the water and the water rolls off of the duck's back? Well, that's what you should do. Just water off the duck's back. Just let it go. Just take a deep breath and drive on. Don't do this. It actually looks like on the story that these two cars pulled over and this guy actually got out of a car and approached this victim, yelling at him before he got in his car and drove away. Don't know if he had his gun out when he was approaching this guy, but that also is a danger for this suspect. Had he tried to unlawfully enter that victim's vehicle during that incident, that's dangerous ground of getting shot, trying to get into somebody's vehicle when you're angry, especially if you've got a gun in your hand. So something to think about. So I hope this video was helpful, just something to think about. Let's all be responsible gun owners here. As a gun owner, you got to have thick skin, okay? You can't let these little things bother you. You don't know what's going on in the mind of the other person driving. Never get out of the car on a road rage incident. If you're being followed, go to a police station if you're aware one is, but just don't engage people at all, or you could be in a lot of serious trouble. Thanks for watching.